The very fact that you undertake that struggle voluntarily, to your amazement, twice a day, is an incredibly pure and, in a sense, noble cause to make. And this has, of course, a pure and noble effect on one's life. So what I want to do this evening is to try to explain why it should be that it has this great effect on one's life, and what those effects are. So, just as a starter, in 1976, Mr. Ikeda, who is, I think you all know, is president of the Lay Society, wrote a very meaningful essay on Gongyo. And in that essay, he said this: the chanting of Gongyo and Daimoku, during which each individual faces the Gohonzon with a serene heart, is the service in which all human beings are equal. This service in which everyone can join in the human family, irrespective of differences in social status, occupation, age, or race, is the lifeblood of Nichiren Daishonin's Buddhism. Without Gongyo, anything you try to do will be as fruitless as if you were cutting at the air. No matter how sharp a sword you may have, it will not help you to cut away the fetters of your own karma. No matter how much you are respected for your great intellect or for your grasp of philosophy, if you are blind to your own inner life, you are just as changeable as a falling star. Gongyo is the only way to establish a life of true and unshakable freedom. It is a revolution in itself, which one can accomplish by himself, the opening of intrinsic creative life force with your own hands. It is the act to plumb the depths of life, enable oneself to truly share the sorrows of his friends, and develop a mind overflowing with compassion and wisdom. The powerful voice of Gongyo matches your life to the rhythm of the vividly pulsing universe and allows you to draw in the breath of cosmic life. This expression of your faith is the very thing which calls forth Buddhahood, the ultimate reality of cosmic life. The believer who chants Daimoku to the Gohonzon himself becomes the very entity of the Gohonzon. The brilliant sun and the lucid moonlight, you hold every single phenomenon in the universe within your two hands joined in prayer. This is the one and only way you can draw in the energy of cosmic life. So that, of course, in very beautiful words, is the whole intent and purpose of Gongyo. That through Gongyo, you actually link yourself to universal life in its entirety. And through this, you break the fetters of your karma, and you find that you can advance positively in your lives. Are you very wet? All right? Great. Thank you very much for coming through this storm. So I think cosmic life is making a slight demonstration today for us. So just to tell you, we're having a talk this evening about Gongyo, the basic practice of Nichiren Daishonin's Buddhism. So the word Gongyo itself means assiduous practice. Assiduous practice. Assiduous practice, as you've gathered from that extract I read, which has a tremendous and significant purpose in one's life. So this assiduous practice is the result of Nichiren Daishonin's own guidance to us. Well, he said that if we were to attain Buddhahood, we must read, recite, and copy the sutra, that being the Lotus Sutra, and chant Daimoku with all our hearts. He didn't, in fact, devise Gongyo as we do it today. as we do it in accordance with this small book. But this ceremony or service of Gongyo was devised in accordance with his guidance that we should read and recite and copy the sutra as often as possible and chant Daimoku with all our hearts. And in another Gosho he says, sit up straight and ponder the true aspect of your life. In other words, there he is talking about not only Daimoku but also strong prayer. So in about the 13th century, finally the practice of Gongyo as we do it today was formulated in its present form. And ever since then, it's been practiced by all followers of Nichiren Daishonin's Buddhism. Now, as you know, most of you know anyway, in Gongyo, it's divided into 5 segments or prayers, main prayers. And in the olden days, at the time that Gongyo, as we do it now, came into being, the priests used to move from temple to temple within the precincts of the head temple of Taisekaji, wow, at the foot of Mount Fuji in Japan. And as they moved from temple to temple, they would recite one of the prayers at each temple. The purpose of this, of course, was to effect the whole of the land of the head temple with the results of their Gongyo and Daimoku. This is how it began. Then, of course, as the lay society began to grow, they naturally followed the same ceremony, but having only one temple, i.e. themselves and their Gohonzon, they did the whole ceremony in front of that Gohonzon. So some people say, why is Gongyo so long? How can I spare half an hour or 35 minutes every day doing Gongyo in the morning and another nearly half an hour in the evening? Well, of course, that comes back to what I said right at the beginning. Gongyo is neither too difficult nor too easy. It's essential that Gongyo is a challenge. If it was too easy, it could no longer be a challenge and it would become something rather boring. The very fact that it's a bit difficult is important. Yet, the very fact that it's not too difficult is important, because anyone, whether they are an uneducated peasant or a professor, should be able to do it with equal effect. So this assiduous practice is a practice of very perfect balance. It's the epitome, if you like, of the Buddha's wisdom. Because we are able to do it every day, morning and evening, if we make that little bit of effort, without actually finding that it interferes with our daily lives whatsoever. So Gongyo is divided into 3 parts, as most of you know. One part consists of reciting the sutra, and one part consists of silent prayers, and the third part consists of chanting Daimoku, chanting Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. And the purpose of all that, reciting the sutra and concentrating on silent prayers, is nothing else but to purify one's life. This assiduous practice is a practice of purification. And I want to try and explain that a little bit further. Probably all of you can easily realize that when you wake up in the morning, you are not necessarily feeling perfectly pure. In fact, it's the time when a lot of us feel rather impure, and it takes bath and shaving and having breakfast and 2 or 3 cups of coffee before we begin to feel normal. This, of course, is because of the lives we lead. We live in a very tense, pressurized society. I dare say if we were living in the countryside with absolutely no worries whatsoever, we wouldn't feel like that in the morning, and we'd get up like the lark. But most of us don't find the morning very easy, in one way or another. And of course, the morning is also the time when we face the day with all its worries and anxieties. So even though we may feel and get up like the lark, still we have the thought of what we've got to get through during that day. So the purpose of Gongyo is to rid one's life of all those impurities, so that you set out for the day absolutely purified, not only from top to toe, but in depth and width and height and all directions. So to understand that, I think it's necessary for me to just talk for a little while about the Buddhist theory of the 9 consciousnesses. Because the purpose of Gongyo is to penetrate through layer after layer of consciousness and unconsciousness or subconsciousness until you reach the 9th consciousness, which is the Buddha consciousness, or if you like, the cosmic or universal consciousness, the very entity of creative life. So, first of all, just to describe these 9 consciousnesses, the first 5 are very easy because they are what we would call our senses. That's seeing, hearing, touching, smelling, and what have I left out? Seeing, hearing, touching, smelling, tasting. The first 5 consciousnesses are those senses. And the 6th consciousness is your conscious mind, the mind that you can feel thinking, your brain, if you like, at work. You can clearly feel that you are going through a process of thought. That is the 6th consciousness. And the 7th consciousness is the first of the subconsciousnesses. I'm sure most of you have heard of that famous saying of Freud, who said that the mind was like an iceberg. We only see or sense or feel the very tip, but below the surface of the water there is an enormous area, which is the area of the subconsciousnesses, which man knows nothing about whatsoever. So Buddhism penetrates into the depths of that iceberg, the depths that lie below the water's level and go down very, very deep. And the first layer of this subconscious is the 7th consciousness, and this is the area where you might say that we make judgment and decisions which rise up eventually into the conscious mind, or the 6th consciousness. So the 7th is a very significant area because it contains our desires which in Buddhism we call bonno. Unbeknownst to us, our desires, that is to say, many of them probably selfish desires, the desires of the ego, are deeply affecting the decisions we make through the 6th consciousness and then out through the first 5. For example, it was Freud actually who said that if you forget a promise, the reason you forget it is because deep in your life your desires do not wish you to fulfill that promise. In other words, there is meaning in everything. To forget, to remember, every emotion has meaning behind it. And desires, bonno, play a very, very strong part in that. So it is in the area of the 7th consciousness that all these desires of our lives exist. I'm sure you can think of other occasions where You intend to do something and you don't. And if you deeply examine yourself, you'll probably find the reason you didn't do it was because you didn't desire to, because some other desire had a greater stronghold on your life. You didn't go to visit your aunt in hospital, though you had strongly intended to do so, because deep in your life, perhaps you didn't like her, or you preferred to watch television, or you were downright lazy. These are the desires or bonno of the seventh consciousness and have a tremendous effect on one's life. The seventh consciousness is the area of one's ego. When I say ego, I use it in the common or garden way, though Buddhism would describe it as the lesser self. Then, deep below the seventh consciousness lies the eighth. The eighth consciousness was partially understood by Jung. Jung, who followed Freud in examining the depths of the human mind, and also was following in a great many ways the understanding of Buddhism. So deep in this eighth consciousness, Jung said, lies all human experience. That is to say, through evolution and lifetime after lifetime, the eighth consciousness holds the memory of humanity. And not only the memories of humanity, but also the memories of the time when we were animals, and the time when we were fishes, and even the time when we were some peculiar-looking small representation of life in the beginning of the evolution of this world. So it was Jung who said that the whole human race shares the same eighth consciousness, this area of experience or memory which goes back throughout time from the aspect of evolution. But of course Buddhism would then say that it also goes back eternally, from lifetime after lifetime after lifetime. And Buddhism that would then add to what Jung taught and say that this is the area where your karma lies. This is the storage house of your karma. This is the storage house of all the effects of every cause that you've made in your whole eternal lifetime. So Buddhism would then go on to say that whether you blow your nose, or you go to bed late, or you have a cold, or you feel happy, or you feel sad, is nothing else but the outcome of the workings of the law of cause and effect. You made a cause, the effect of which is for you to blow your nose at this moment. You made a cause, the effect of which is that you're now broke. You made a cause, the effect of which is that you didn't sleep a wink last night. You made a cause, the effect of which is that your relationship with your sister is terrible. And the storage place for all these effects is in the eighth consciousness. And then finally, we have something beyond what the psychologists have taught, which is the ninth consciousness. This again is shared like the eighth. In a sense, it's a collective consciousness. But the difference is that many of us don't know that it exists, and therefore are unable to enter it, tap it, or make use of it. So the purpose of Buddhism, in this sense, is for you to discover the area of the ninth consciousness and spend as much of your lifetime as you can in it. So the ninth consciousness, the Buddha consciousness, you could call it, the consciousness of the universal creative force of life, which Buddhism calls Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. This incredible, purifying and creative force which enables the complexities of life to work, not only to work, but if they are left in their natural state, to work for value and creativity. So, if you start back at the top again, you can see that all one's actions and behaviors are, of course, played out, if you like to put it that way, through the first five, which were the senses: seeing, feeling, hearing, touching, smelling. It is through those senses that we relate to everything and that we pass on our feelings to others. And these senses are, of course, motivated first by the conscious mind, by the sixth consciousness, by the thinking mind. But that in turn has at its base the seventh consciousness, the area of one's ego or desires. So far below the thinking mind, which you can feel or sense, the desires are working at the base of it, preventing, as we said in that example, preventing you to carry out your promise. Because deep in your life, though you don't feel it in your conscious mind, you don't in the least wish to fulfill it for some probably quite selfish reason. And then again, deep below that lies the area of the eighth consciousness, which Jung partially understood, and psychiatrists and psychologists today partially understand, the area of the collective consciousness, the shared area of all humanity, the memories of everything, every experience that's occurred in our eternal lives. And this is also the area where, as I said, karma, or the effects of all we've done, is stored. So, of course, as the seventh consciousness is working, so it draws on the eighth consciousness. In the seventh consciousness, desires and the effect of them are like being pulled upwards towards the thinking mind. But below that is the eighth, where experience, memory of the distant past, the memory that causes you to have the most strange, jumbled up dreams, which seem quite meaningless, the memory which pulls all sorts of things out of the past, and also your karma, the effects of everything that you've ever done, goes into play and is drawn upwards into this extraordinary blend, which eventually we call our thinking mind. And then deep below that, as I say, lies the ninth consciousness. So, thinking of these various layers of consciousness, you can see how your desires, unbeknown to you, play such an incredible part in one's life. And you can see how experience, memory, can put you off from doing something without you even realizing it. Deep in that life below your thinking mind is this surging sea which every so often bubbles up into your conscious mind and creates some sort of disturbance or deflection according to the influence, according to the desire, according to the memory. Some memory which frightens you deep in your life will cause fear in your thinking mind about something, though you can't really understand why. So this is rather a sort of nightmarish picture, isn't it, in a way? All these memories, all these experiences. And I think often, if you read a book about psychology, it is in a sense sort of frightening. It's such an unknown world, and it's so vast. But Buddhism says, never mind all that. Of course, it's important that we understand it. But never mind that, because what matters is that you penetrate below all that to the ninth consciousness, the universal consciousness, where all the power and wisdom and compassion of the whole universe is at work. And if you penetrate to that, the surge of that force of wisdom and compassion and courage and life force from the depths of your life will purify all that junk and put it into the right place, into its right perspective. And your conscious mind, followed by your senses, will begin to work in accordance with the wisdom and compassion of the Buddha. So I've gone into that rather lengthy explanation, which is probably not so easy to follow, because the purpose of Gongyo is to penetrate all those layers until you plumb the ninth consciousness. This is the whole purpose of the practice of Gongyo, to plumb to the depths of that purifying force with its ingredients of wisdom and compassion, so that it begins to surge through your life and carry you through the remainder of the day. That area, the ninth consciousness, is what Buddhism calls the greater self. So on no account is Buddhism saying you should suppress your ego or lesser self. On the contrary, Buddhism says by activating your greater self, your ego will then naturally follow a course which is creative, harmonious, and valuable. So this, of course, is a very important point. Any practice which tries to suppress the ego is bad for us, of course. It causes intense frustration, tenseness, and pressure, which eventually explodes in some way or the other. But the whole great thing about Buddhism is that it doesn't wish you to deny your ego. What it asks you to do is to activate your greater ego, your greater self, the Buddha self, which will then direct the lesser self in a way which is truly valuable. And of course, through that, one finds peace and happiness in one's own life. So that is what Gongyo is all about. As a matter of fact, for those of you here who have done Gongyo over a period, would know this, that you do, if you're really alert to it, notice yourself going through various layers as you do Gongyo. Some people might say, I can't understand why. The first 5 minutes I was doing Gongyo this morning, I felt so angry. Or you might see someone else fidgeting and scratching their heads. But that'll only be in the first moment or two. As they penetrate through the first 5, purify those first 5 senses, you may well scratch your head, or your back, or look at your fingernails. You watch people, you see them do it. And the anger, that's something that is arising out of the sense consciousness. Some anger about some desire that's not fulfilled rises up in your life, but the next minute in your practice it's disappeared, and you're somewhere below that. Sometimes it may go on for longer. It depends how strong it is in your life. But in the end, you penetrate all those layers. If you like, you're driving a pipeline down through your life. And finally, you plumb the Buddha state, Buddha consciousness itself. So, of course, thereafter, having driven your pipeline down, the purpose of daily Gongyo, morning and evening, is to keep the pipeline pure and clean. Every day we meet new experiences, new problems, new difficulties. We meet people that we don't particularly like. We meet people we like. Life is a real jumble of events, in constantly changing, constantly in flux. So that daily practice, that assiduous practice of Gongyo is very essential to purify your life. You notice its purification after you've done it for a bit. Someone might say, really, I'm really seeing how fantastic the trees are outside my bedroom window nowadays. Your perception becomes very clear. Things seem brighter after a good Gongyo. You can see beauty in things that you couldn't see beauty in before. You're very perceptive to people's moods. Quite instinctively you understand when somebody's suffering, though they may look quite happy. All these things are a result of the purification of your consciousnesses, so that your life really is working in full. So, of course, at the end of all this procedure of reciting the sutra, this assiduous practice, and saying silent prayers, you eventually chant Daimoku. So the number of Daimoku you chant is up to you, up to the time you've got, but what the high priest says is, try not to do less than 200 or 300. 200 or 300 is not very many. It's about 5 minutes to 7 minutes chanting of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. So one might say, why so little? But of course your life at the end of Gongyo is in such perfect balance and is so pure that you will get the absolute maximum effect from the prayers that you're wishing or expressing while you chant Daimoku. So of course there are other times in your life when you want to chant more Daimoku. That's important if you're wishing to change some heavy bit of karma that suddenly appeared in your life. But as a general run, as a general principle, because of the perfection in your life which Gongyo can create, 200 to 300 Daimoku during the service of Gongyo is enough. So the purpose of Gongyo then is to purify your life and rid it of negativity. That is what you're purifying yourself of, the negative or the destructive force in your life. And in its place, to bring forth life force and wisdom and compassion. So of course, the negative force in life is incredibly strong. Most of us have experienced it, and experience it much too often, perhaps. It's an unbelievably powerful force which can bring you down into the depths of despair if you let it do it, and which can cause so much hurt to other people and so on. The purpose of Gongyo is to overcome that, and put your life in this positive state. So of course Gongyo is a battle. It can't be anything else but a battle. And it's in the spirit of battle or challenge that you should approach Gongyo every day. You have to completely overcome that powerful negative force in your life. And you won't do it unless you have a spirit of challenge from the very beginning. So of course it's true that on 1 or 2 mornings or 1 or 2 evenings, you may find your life in an unbelievably balanced and wonderful state. And you'll feel like doing Gongyo, and you sit down and you do it, and you feel great at the end of it. But really these occasions are quite rare. Mostly we find the negative force trying to stop us from even doing Gongyo, trying to make us have another cup of coffee or another cigarette, trying to divert us to do something else which we consider so important, and so on and so on. This is proof, actually, of the value of Gongyo. These negative forces are only working to stop you from doing Gongyo because Gongyo is so important and valuable to us. Because the negative force wants to rule your life, it always tries to stop you or tries to make it difficult. So really, for the moment you do your first sancho, the first time you say Nam-myoho Renge-kyo 3 times before Gongyo begins, if you're really perceptive about yourself, and it's very wise to be so, you'll see what sort of state you're in those few seconds. My, I'm in a bad way this morning. Gosh, you're in a miserable state. My, you're irritable. What are you in such a hurry about? Take it easy. In those first few moments, you can judge yourself. And if you judge your present state at that time, then if you have good sense, you'll take up the challenge and determine to defeat it. So every Gongyo has this nature. This is, if you like, the spirit of Gongyo, to take up the battle. It's so much easier to win the battle in front of your Gohonzon when you're doing Gongyo than it is to have to fight that battle outside. You win it in front of the Gohonzon, or you win it if you haven't got a Gohonzon while you do that Gongyo. Then every problem and difficulty that you meet outside in your daily life, you'll have the wisdom to overcome. So isn't it easier to do it in one's own sitting room or bedroom or wherever you are able to do your Gongyo, rather than have to fight for one's life outside in actual life? The battle is won in yourself. You win the battle in yourself, and then the actual battle outside seems like nothing. It's overcome so easily. So this Gongyo is an incredible thing. And the more you go on doing it, year after year, the more incredible you realize it is. And amazingly enough, you never get tired of it. And you find more and more value from it. To me, to my way of thinking, Gongyo is the greatest gift of the Buddha. There is no greater gift that we inherited from him than Gongyo. Because a great Gongyo is the source of every benefit, every joy, and the development of every single area of one's life. So I'd like to just mention a bit about those three segments now: the sutra, the silent prayers, and daimoku. So first of all, the sutra, as you all know, I think, is the Lotus Sutra. And the words that we are pronouncing, which sound so strange, are the phonetic sounds of the Chinese characters which the great translator Kumarajiva translated the original Sanskrit of the sutra into Chinese. The characters that you see in this little book are Chinese, classical Chinese characters, with many of them an unbelievably deep meaning, and most of them being not understood by the average Chinese or Japanese person today. Classical characters which are not used in many of them in modern terms. So a Chinese person can read the character from the point of view of sound, but may not understand the meaning whatsoever. And to make things more complicated still, that phonetic sound is in accordance with the Japanese language and not the Chinese language. So when you recite this sutra, you're reciting the sound of a Chinese character in Japanese phonetics. How about that? It's really complicated, isn't it? But you can understand from that that this Gongyo, this sutra, is just as difficult to recite for everybody. Even if you're Japanese, it's as difficult as it is for a German or an Englishman or a French woman. It's really quite universal in its difficulty in that respect. And equally, its understanding is difficult for everybody. A person living today in Hong Kong or Peking or Shanghai wouldn't understand the meaning of these words any more than you and I do. So this, of course, came about because Nichiren Daishonin was born in Japan. If he was born in Germany or France or somewhere, or this country, obviously the way he would have pronounced those Chinese characters might have been different. But he was born in Japan, so he used the Japanese phonetics, and we continue to use them today. If we all did them in different sounds, we could never do Gongyo together. And unity in that respect would be difficult. This is a universal ceremony, as Sensei said in that essay I read out to you at the very beginning. Something which the whole human race, wherever they come from, whatever they look like, can take part in together in an instant. So you can see this working if you go, for example, to the head temple in Japan. you might find yourself in a group of 30 or 40 or 50 people when you first arrive, and they may come from as many as 20, 30 or 40 different countries. Many of them may not speak English. But in a moment, without hesitation, all those 40 or 50 people, from wherever they come in the whole world, can get down together and do a united Gongyo. And immediately the barriers are broken down. So there is great meaning in the fact that the characters and the words and the way we pronounce it are as they are. And of course, each Chinese character in itself contains a wealth of meaning. Many chapters, even a book, can be written on the meaning of one Chinese character. So people who say, well, why can't we recite it in English? But I fear you'd be reciting many different volumes in the process to really understand the meaning of each of these characters. Is 2 chapters. One chapter is called the Hoben chapter, and the other is called the Juryo chapter. And Nichiren Daishonin said, in all of Shakyamuni's Lotus Sutra, these 2 chapters contain the essence. Therefore, if you recite these 2 chapters, it's as if you're reciting all 28 chapters of the Lotus Sutra. So this is why the Juryo, the Hoben and the Juryo were chosen. And very roughly speaking, the meaning of those 2 chapters is the Hoben chapter expresses one's expectation that we will attain Buddhahood. The Hoben chapter was the chapter which said that everybody had the Buddha state within them. So we're expressing in that sense our clear expectation that through the practice we will attain Buddhahood, each one of us individually. And the Juryo chapter expresses our understanding of the power of Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, of its existence and of its incredible and wonderful power. In the Juryo chapter, in fact, Shakyamuni explained his experience of the law called Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. So in always reciting that in that sense, we are acknowledging our understanding of its power. But I hasten to say at this point that it doesn't matter if you don't understand it. This is a point which is very difficult for perhaps particularly us in this country to understand or accept, because we always want to know about everything. But in the case of this sutra, it doesn't matter if you don't understand it. And quite honestly, even if you got the book on the sutra, which you can get, and you read it through, you still wouldn't understand it. But you will understand it step by step by step. So in my own case, I think I said the other day, I picked up that book because I, like most English people, I felt I must understand what I was reciting. How could I sit there like an idiot reciting something that I didn't understand, etc., etc. And I read the lecture on the sutra, which is the book on it, and as I say, I just didn't understand it at all. And I put it aside, and I didn't take it up again, I think, for at least 3 years, and then I don't think I understood it very well. And then I took it up again about 3 or 4 years later and began to understand it a bit more. So this is a gradual process as you deepen your faith in the teachings of Buddha and your understanding of its principles, so your understanding of the Lotus Sutra will grow. But going back to what I said right at the beginning, the reason why it doesn't matter if you don't understand it is that the purpose of Gongyo is to make a great cause, which will have a great effect in your life. In a sense, the great cause you're making is that because Buddhism says you should do Gongyo, you're doing it. Sincerely, doing your best. at something which is a bit difficult. This is such a pure cause to make and has such a pure effect on one's life. So in the course of that reciting the sutra, whenever you reach the end of the Hoben chapter, you repeat 3 times Shoi shoho nyoze so nyoze sho nyoze tai nyoze riki nyoze san nyoze in nyoze en nyoze kan nyoze homo kukyo to. Why 3 times? So, without going into any detailed explanation, those nyoze sos and nyoze shos, those nyozes, are called the 10 factors of life. They're the 10 factors through which we express whatever our state is. If we're in the state of anger, we shall express that anger in 10 different ways. The 10 factors, which are entirely consistent. So every part of our body and our spirit will be expressing that anger consistently. Homma kyukyoto means from beginning to end. But likewise, if we're in the Buddha state, we shall express the Buddha state from our lives in 10 different ways. So you say that 3 times because you wish to express in your life what are known as the 3 attributes of the Buddha. The 3 attributes of the Buddha. That is, expressing the Buddha state in the very entity of your life, and secondly, expressing the Buddha state in what you might term the spiritual aspect of your life, the unseen aspect of your life, and expressing all the attributes of the Buddha in the physical or outward aspect of your life, which includes your actions. The 3 attributes. So when you say those nyozes over 3 times, this actually represents your desire to express the attributes of the Buddha, those 3 attributes, which embrace your whole life, the very entity and core of your life, the spiritual aspect and the physical aspect. The core from which everything arises through the spiritual and the physical, all in expressing the Buddha state. So, when we recite the sutra, it should be lively. We are expressing ourselves in a way which we want to be in harmony with the rhythm of life. The rhythm of life couldn't be like a funeral march, could it? The rhythm of life must be incredibly vibrant. The rhythm of life produces trees and plants and flowers and gales and seas and waves and all the rest of it. So Gongyo is not an activity which should be done at a very, very slow and mournful pace. It should be brisk and rhythmical. Sensei once said it should be at the speed or rhythm of a galloping horse. Not a horse out of control, but a galloping horse. Well controlled, but nevertheless galloping. The rhythm of life. So of course when you first start to learn it, you can't do it at that pace. But gradually you get into the rhythm of Gongyo. And its briskness, its rhythm is very important. The rhythm of Gongyo is very important because that will be the rhythm of your life for the rest of the day. So if you feel sluggish when you start Gongyo, this is another point. Immediately you should say to yourself, enough of that. This is going to be a great rhythmical Gongyo, and I'm really going to do it. And then we're told that every word should be pronounced clearly and distinctly, not slurred. No good. Every word clearly. So it is true that sometimes when you hear many people doing Gongyo together, it's difficult to distinguish the words sometimes. But that's because there may be a fractional difference in which each voice is actually saying them. But if you hear someone doing Gongyo alone, It should be very clear. Fast, but clear. This requires effort. It doesn't require any effort whatsoever. But to say it very clearly really does require effort. Effort is part of the cause that you're making. The more clear and the more rhythmical, the greater the cause, the greater the concentration and effort you're putting into it. Assiduous practice, Gongyo means. Not lazy practice, assiduous. So these points, although they may seem small, have a great reflection on one's life. Now I want to talk a bit about the silent prayers. The purpose of the silent prayers is very, very different indeed to reciting the sutra. The silent prayers in Japanese is go kannenmon, go kannenmon. So go, like Gohonzon, means honorable or honored, and mon means a passage or a sentence. And kannen means concentration or meditation. Concentration or meditation on a particular phrase or wish or passage which has some important meaning. So the silent prayers in many other religions is the only form of prayer. But in Nichiren Daishonin's Buddhism, the silent prayer is a moment or two of great concentration in order to reactivate your determination or your gratitude. That is what the silent prayers are for. A moment of intense concentration to reactivate either your gratitude or your determination. So it's a strange thing, isn't it? But gratitude and determination are two of the most difficult things to achieve in life. Basically, human beings can be very ungrateful. We take an awful lot for granted. And often we find it very difficult to make determinations. New Year resolutions we stick to for a week or two. And in no time we've forgotten about them. So the purpose of these prayers is to reactivate those two important areas, gratitude and determination. So if you look at a Gongyo book, you'll find that the first three prayers are concerned with gratitude. The first one is gratitude to what are known as the Buddhist Gods or the Shoten Zenjin. Sorry, something's gone in my throat. The Shoten Zenjin are the forces of life, the forces of the universe. So every day we acknowledge that we need these forces working in us. I have to pause a moment. Sorry. These forces that are working all around us, we express in the first prayer the sun. We talk about the sun, about the stars, and about the moon. These are very obvious forces which have an effect on our lives. But as I've explained before, there are many other forces that are not so obvious and are constantly working, either in our favor or against us. There is a force which stops you short of having an accident, but that same force can work negatively and cause you to have the accident. So it's these forces which it's most important to have working in rhythm with us. And this is what we say this first prayer for. To have these forces working positively for us. And they will work positively for us because through us being in the Buddha state, we will then put them in the Buddha state. Like everything else, if you're angry, it causes anger or upset in other people. and in other things around you. Likewise, if you're in the Buddha state, though it's difficult to believe or understand, you are activating the Buddha state in everything around you, including the forces of the universe. The sun can be a destroyer. The sun is, on the other hand, the most creative force that one can imagine. But if you're lost in a desert, as I said the other day, the sun can destroy you. So these forces are working constantly all the time, and we need them to work with us for our protection. And of course, as you go on with the practice, you get more and more examples of this amazing protection which the practice and the Gohonzon give one. So the first prayer is to express gratitude for that. The second prayer is gratitude to the Gohonzon. And you express that gratitude by reciting what are known as the 10 virtues of the Gohonzon. I'm not going to talk about them now, because really they're a lecture in themselves. But gradually, as your practice goes on, you understand each of those 10 virtues. And thirdly, you express gratitude to the people who have brought Buddhism through to this day and enabled us to practice. First, to the Buddha, Nichiren, Daishonin. Then to Nikko, the second part of that prayer. Nikko, who was his closest disciple and who fought hard all his life to keep the teachings of Nichiren Daishonin absolutely pure and to establish the Gohonzon in the place where Nichiren Daishonin wished it to be at the foot of Mount Fuji. And after that you thank the other priests who have one by one throughout the centuries brought the teachings in their absolute purity to this day. So when we think of Nikko, and as we understand Nikko's life, we think of courage. We can't help but wish to have that same courage. When we think of all the other priests that brought the teachings down to this day, speaking personally, I can't help but think of my responsibility to make sure that the teachings are passed on in their absolute purity to our children and our children's children. Gratitude in itself is an incredibly important thing. You cannot be happy unless you can express gratitude. As someone once said, gratitude opens up a whole area of life which is otherwise completely closed to one. The practice of Gongyo gradually prizes us open in our lives until we begin to feel gratitude, if we're the sort of person, and there are many, who find it difficult to feel grateful for being alive, to feel grateful for being healthy, grateful that we've got a roof over our heads, and so on, despite all the other problems that we may have. Gratitude is vital for happiness. And then the fourth prayer, the mood changes, and this concerns determination. Our determination in the first part for Kosen Rufu, for peace in the world. And in the second part, our determination to do our own human revolution, to overcome our own weak points, our own unhappy karma. I pray to erase my negative karma created by my own past causes and to attain a life of fulfillment in the present and future. So this fourth prayer is solely concerned with determination. And then finally in the fifth prayer, the first part concerns our deceased friends and relatives and our determination again to push them forward through the state of death into the state of life again. And not what is more, into a state of life where they too can find the Gohonzon. And last of all, there is a prayer for the peace of the world and the whole universe. So these prayers may seem quite simple in a way, but I hope you understand that their purpose is to re-establish these two vital points of gratitude and determination in our lives. The reason, of course, is that the negative force is always trying to stop us expressing those two very fundamental feelings in our lives. The negative force in our life does not like gratitude, and the negative force in our life does not like determination. So these few moments when we concentrate on these prayers, we should really concentrate with our whole life, trying to express gratitude and trying to express determination. This in itself is most important, of course, for how we live through the rest of our day, that we can activate those two important attributes of gratitude and determination. And then finally, after doing the silent prayers, renewing what we call our ichinen through those silent prayers with our whole concentration, we then start to chant Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. So I think I should say one point there, and that is that when you're reciting the sutra, to begin with especially, you'll find your mind wanders a great deal. You think of many different things while you're reciting that sutra. You try to concentrate. Either you try to concentrate on the words in the book, making sure that you pronounce them all correctly, or you're trying to concentrate on Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, on the Gohonzon in front of you. But even then, quite often your mind wanders and all sorts of strange thoughts come into your mind. Don't worry about that. What matters is that you try to do it to the best of your ability, with the best rhythm, the best pronunciation, with clarity, and sitting up straight with determination. But if your mind wanders, don't worry. But when it comes to the silent prayers, then it's very important not to let your mind wander. By the time you've finished reciting the sutra, your life is very pure. Therefore, your thoughts or wishes express themselves out of your life with great clarity and purity and strength. So to have a mind free of other things during those silent prayers is very important. Otherwise, you'll be expressing the wrong thing out of your life. So to concentrate on the meaning of those prayers and relate them to one's own personal life is best. As I said, when you think of Nikko Shonin, Nikko had courage. Nikko protected the Gohonzon. He protected the purity of the teachings. You can relate that to your own life. Yes, I must protect my Gohonzon with my whole life. I must always make sure that the teachings are kept pure, that I never distort anything. And as I said in the case of the other priests, again, related to your life. You thank them in your mind for bringing it to today. But it's quite natural then to realize again every day that you have to take them forward to the next generation and the next generation. So through relating it to one's own life, as well as reading it with care, you can really concentrate your mind. So Daimoku I've already spoken about, chanting of Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, which follows the prayers. The minimum is 200 to 300 Daimoku. This is enough to get the maximum value of that Gongyo that you've done. You can pack an awful lot into 200 to 300 Daimoku. When you go all the way to Japan to see the Daigohonzon, you only see it for 5 to 7 minutes. And in that time, you express your whole life, your whole desires, your whole wishes, your whole determinations. It's amazing what you can do in a short time. So the same with Gongyo. If you wish to chant more, of course, please do. But on the other hand, as Sensei said, if someone else is doing Gongyo with you, and you wish to chant more, please finish Gongyo with 200 or 300 Daimoku, and then after that, say to whoever's next to you, now I'm going on to chant Daimoku, you know, if you want to join in with me, please do. But if you don't, please carry on whatever you want to do. In other words, you shouldn't chain someone beside you. A husband, for example, who wants to chant an hour's daimoku during Gongyo, makes it very difficult for a wife if he won't terminate Gongyo. She's sort of chained there while he goes on with his daimoku. So, of course, we should use good sense and in doing these things. But so far as other matters, we do need to chant more daimoku, of course. If you have to break through some heavy problem or karma, you need to chant more to your heart's content, Nichiren Daishonin said, until you know you've chanted enough. If you're really honest with yourself, you could know that. So, as far as Gongyo is concerned, 200 to 300 is enough. Because your life is very perfect by the time you chant that daimoku, especially if you've done a really challenging Gongyo. So, just before I close, a word or two about the actual simple details of that practice. The first thing is, you should sit up straight, and you must keep your eyes open as you look at the Gohonzon when you chant daimoku and when you're reciting the sutra. The only time you close your eyes is in the concentration of the silent prayers. Sitting up straight is a very obvious way to galvanize yourself into action and take up the challenge of the battle against your negative force, isn't it? Also, one should be tidily or neatly dressed. If you just slop out of bed and get in front of your Gohonzon, or get down to do your Gongyo in your nightie or pajamas, all sort of unwashed and crumpled, this doesn't give you the right attitude of this practice. You should be alert. This means having a wash and brush up and doing your teeth, putting on a pair of trousers and a clean shirt, or whatever. Otherwise, it immediately means that you're starting off at a disadvantage if your life is slovenly. So the attitude that you begin Gongyo is very important to winning the battle. And then, of course, you have your beads, which are an aid to concentration. They have a symbolic meaning, but their whole purpose is as an aid to help you to concentrate during Gongyo. So this is why people rub them occasionally if they find their concentration is slipping. It's amazing how deep an effect in one's life it has just to rub those beads a couple of times. But not all the time. Some people, it's like a symphony. That's not what these beads are for, and I can't imagine how many pairs they get through in a year. But they're not. The purpose is occasionally to help you to concentrate, just to rub them a little. And of course they have meaning. Some people say, why must I sit like this with my palms together? But actually, this is a very natural thing for a human being to do. Somehow to us, it's not natural to pray, say, with one's hands around, or with one's hands around one's knees. It just isn't natural. That position of prayer is very natural and helps us to concentrate. So, of course, it has meaning, even then, in Buddhist terms. Your two hands with the 5 fingers making 10 represents the 10 worlds. And the beads, which contain all 108 human desires, represents your life. In that sense, your life is in your hands, nowhere else, but your business to do what you want with it. Really, that's what that position with those beads in it means. And then the beads have these tassels, so symbolically they represent the human body with a head and 2 arms and 2 legs. But also these 3 beads here represent the law, the Buddha, and the priest. The law in the center, and the Buddha and the priest, who are essential for its propagation. So each of these things has meaning, but these are symbolic. The most practical value of them is an aid to concentration. So I hope that you can see from all we've said that your attitude towards Gongyo is important if you're going to win a victory in that Gongyo. How you prepare for it and how you set about doing it will dictate whether you win that battle really triumphantly or only just, by a fraction. Everything counts from the very beginning because it's a challenge. And the more you appreciate that it's a challenge, the more you enjoy it, the more great Gongyo becomes. So if anyone's got any questions to ask, please do. Anything you like. Have a little relax if anyone thinks of anything. Has anyone here never heard Gongyo practiced? Everybody's heard it. Oh, that's so difficult for you, I think, to know what I was talking about. But anyway, I hope you hear it soon, and maybe what I've said will be more meaningful then. Any questions from anybody? Anything you like? Yes. Jim, yes. Yes. Shu, yes. Yes. No. And they also chant other things as well. Yes. Yes. Yes, that's right. And also the only sect that chants Nam-myoho Renge Kyo only. So in Nichiren Shu, I don't want to get involved in their practice, but they chant all sorts of different things. They would also perhaps give you a personal chant if you wished one, or they'll give you a personal Gohonzon with all sorts of different things on it. It's something totally different to Nichiren Shoshu. Nichiren Shoshu, of course, those words mean the orthodox line of Nichiren's Buddhism. So that all goes back to the days when Nikko was so important a man and so courageous, because after Nichiren Daishonin died, several of his close disciples were so frightened because of the persecution that had been going on at that time that they defected to other sects. And these sects that still exist today are teaching part of Nichiren Daishonin's teachings, but not the whole teaching, arose from those people. Nikko Shonin was the only one who stuck his ground and followed exactly the will of Nichiren Daishonin. Okay? Yes. No, I don't think so. The Butsudan, there are a great variety of shapes of Butsudans, but of course basically it needs to be the shape that takes the Gohonzon, of course. And I think the second point is that the Butsudan should not in any way deflect from one's view or of the importance of the Gohonzon itself. So in the way it's designed, it should be in such a way that all attention, as it were, when it's open, is on the Gohonzon. If you had a Butsudan with all sorts of fantastic figures, I'm just joking, but if you had a Butsudan with all sorts of fantastic figures or statues around it, that inevitably would take people's eyes off the Gohonzon, because they'd be looking at all these figures and so on. So the whole concentration of its design should be towards the Gohonzon that's in it. But you can use, what color or what wood you like. Again, perhaps if you had a violent purple, it might take your eyes off the Gohonzon a bit. So normally a fairly subdued color is best. Does that sort of answer it? Yes. In that sense, I think it's rather like framing a really good picture. If you frame a really good picture, you choose that frame very carefully, don't you? So that it enhances the picture, yet it doesn't deflect from the picture itself. It's rather the same, I think, in choosing the design of a butsudan. It's a frame, really. It's a protection. It should protect it from dust and so on. And it's a frame, isn't it? Yes, it is, but there's one point about spotlights. Be sure that it's not too close, because if it's too close, the heat of the spotlight on the parchment of the Gonzo will in the end dry it so much that it'll shorten its life seriously. So always try to keep the spot well away so that it doesn't get hot. No, I haven't, no. No. That's a good point, isn't it? Where should the butsudan be? But I don't think that you can lay down any rules about this, because really, of course, the Gohonzon should be in the place of honor, in one's house, in the most important position in the whole house, because it's the prime point of one's life. But nevertheless, I quite understand that when people first practice, they don't necessarily completely understand that point. Therefore, they might not feel like putting it in the prime place in the house. But what I am sure of is that gradually, as you practice more, so you feel you wish to put it in the prime place. So sometimes a Gohonzon may begin in a bedroom, but in the end, after a year or two, it usually ends up in the best place, in the sitting room. But this is something that people must judge for themselves. There's no rules on this point. All I can say is that for myself, I would want to put it in the absolute prime position in the whole house. Okay? Steady. Yes. Yes, certainly. It's a strange thing, but what you do in front of your Gohonzon reflects really what you're doing to your own life. So we often say, if you forget to change the water, or if you forget to dust your butsudan, inevitably you'll discover that that's because you're being careless about your own life in some way. This is so strange, but you find it's true. What you do to the Gohonzon reflects your life state. So likewise, if your Gohonzon, if you're satisfied just to put your Gohonzon in its butsudan, in a position where it's wobbling all over the place, or whatever, when someone walks across the floor, it goes like that. Of course, you'll find that you're equally careless about the foundation of your own life. It's so strange. If you're really careful about putting your butsudan so that it's firm as a rock, and there's no chance of it being blown over by the wind or by a curtain when it's flapping because of the breeze, it doesn't wobble whenever you walk across a particular floorboard, that always results in the fact that you're being careful about the foundation of your life. You wish to base your life on a strong foundation. You have that desire, and it expresses itself in the way you put your Gohonzon. He borrowed the sutra. But this was very important because his Buddhism was in the direct flow of Buddhism from Shakyamuni to the present day. So in using the Lotus, in using the Lotus Sutra in his practice, he was, if you like, showing its direct connection with the Buddhism of Shakyamuni, the Buddhism of all time. But in a sense, he borrowed that sutra, because in that Gongyo chapter, Shakyamuni